Hello HEMA friends and welcome to this new video. Today we're going to review a number of fencing actions. So let's start from the first one, in which I try to provoke my opponent to strike an attack, to land an attack, which works, by the way, is my student Marco. And he lands a thrust, which I parry in frontale basically, and then I answer back with a mandrito sottano, so an attack from below and from the right. Unluckily, this kind of attack, a true edge sottano, it's not the best in certain senses, so to me it is no quality hit in this kind of case, especially because I barely hit the end. But one of the pros of this action in this case is that it stops the next attack of the opponent, and you are perfectly in the condition to stop the action of the opponent, either by striking at the hands or just by going back in posta di donna. So the second action is kind of funny, so it is pure luck actually. I start from posta di finestra, la sinestra. My opponent tried to strike me during my action, during my thrust, but he lands, instead of landing a vertical fendente, he goes for a more horizontal strike, which is a bad idea. In fact, I managed to, well, let's say, void the action of my opponent and land my clean thrust toward the opponent's neck. The action is good, but it is based on luck, unluckily. So next action. The next action starts in a very interesting way. So I parry the false edge sottano of my opponent, which is kind of hard to parry. Most people find it hard to defend that kind of attack. I will make a video on the subject in the future, I promise it. Then, unluckily, I don't use this kind of occasion, so I don't answer back. Then the fight keeps going. I basically parry a fendente, which again is trying to bore me. Actually, it is not really going for my hands. In fact, after it, I receive another false edge strike from below, which now hits my hands because the timing is far better and I can't easily defend from it. Now the fourth action is pretty interesting. My student Marco defends from one of my thrusts, which actually starts from too far away, honestly, and the timing is not very good. So I tried to do a little feint at the beginning, but he didn't fall for it. And he paired the action with extended arms, and he ended up landing some kind of, I would say, zverkao or false edge fendente to an extent. But yeah, there is kind of decent quality into it. It is not a very hard strike because it was moving on the other direction, but it is good enough, and he managed to land a clean action on my head, which it was cool. Now the next action is really interesting, especially for what happens at the beginning. I try to provoke the attack of Marco again. He then lands a thrust, but it is just meant to make me parry it, and he wants to land another action on the outside. From the inside of myself, let's say, I perceive this kind of thing. There is something different from the previous thrust. There is lesser commitment, and in fact I go for a second parry. I manage to parry the second action in posta di donna, and then I strike back with a mezzano to hit my opponent, but my opponent goes backward, and so he flees to keep fighting for another exchange. Then we stare at each other a little, trying to enter into distance, but no one is very into the idea of doing it till I manage to find a time to land a feint on with a fendente on the inside line of my opponent, and then I land a roverso fendente on the outside line. Now the next action is very funny because it starts with me doing the same exact thing. So I feint and attack. The idea is to show a pattern that my opponent may recognize, and then doing something on top of it. That doing something is trying to parry. So I feint and attack, but instead of moving forward, I move aside, so to keep the distance. My opponent redirects and then lands a fendente, which everything is going as planned, but my parry doesn't work because I'm also moving backward while parrying. I didn't trusted my parry, unluckily, not enough. and so I miss the occasion to land anything, so my plan doesn't work. We then divide, and there is another exchange in which Marco almost thrusts underneath my arms, but nothing happens. We divide, and then after a split of second he lands a one-handed thrust, which I barely manage to parry, and while he is recovering from the one-handed thrust, I hit his left arm. Very interesting action, very funny actually. Now in the next action, what happens is that I land the thrust, and Marco strikes a fendente on top of my posta longa. The weapon slides on top of the posta longa, just displaces the thrust enough, and lands on both my hands and arms. A very, very good action actually, because it defends and hits a very delicate target at the same time. Very good. Now in the next action, Marco tries to most probably try to make me defend on the outside by landing a thrust and then landing a fendente on the inside line, but I move backward and I defend also by pairing the actions. Then I go back in posta donna, and Marco simply strikes a fendente, which I try to parry with my own fendente, but unluckily my one is on top of the opponent one, which results in me putting my hands in front of me while the fendente of Marco is just cutting in that point, which means that my hands get cut because of a funny error. Now in the next action, everything starts with me trying to provoke Marco, but Marco doesn't fall anymore to my provocation, so I strike to go for an attack toward the arm of my opponent parries. He then answers back, I also parry the action, and then I answer back, trying to go for the head, but my opponent voids and defends enough, so I retreat out of distance, because it is just too scary. When you start to land too much actions, it starts to get scary. My opponent engages my blade and tries to thrust at me. I parry the action, and he instantly goes for a reverso fendente, which hits my shoulder, and then tries to defend and retreat backward. A good action actually. I'm pretty happy of this action because I managed to take the rhythm of the opponent. Marco tries to bore me with a number of fancy actions by trying to move at the verge of the distance, but I noticed that he is entering enough into distance for one of my attacks, and at the second time he enters distance, I strike in between his two actions. That's why the attack lands. Pretty happy of it actually. Now this action starts with me trying to cut the left arm of my opponent, which is exposed enough for this kind of snipe, let's call it, but it doesn't work. Then I retreat and I set up for another action. The idea is to land a thrust into the inside and instantly rotate to hit either the head or the arms of my opponent, as Fiore says. And it works. I managed to land a reverso fendente on the opponent hand, right hand of my opponent, while he's going to parry the next action, the reverso fendente. Now this new action is funny because it is based on expectation and on the knowledge we have of each other at this point, and the actions that we actually landed during the fight. So what happens is that I strike a fendente, my opponent retreats enough, parries the fendente, and goes for his false edge strike or thrust toward me with the hands high as usual. Marco uses it a lot against me actually. I know that is going to happen, and I raise my arms to parry it actually. Then I go for a mandrito sottano, but I stop it, so I don't commit for it. Marco tries to parry it, so he lowers his guards, and then that's the moment in which I strike a fendente, which basically it is almost a fendente in the bind, because the line is still covered, but not enough, because Marco is trying to defend low and not high. So I catch a weaker part of my opponent and I manage to strike a fendente on the opponent's head. Now the next action sees me striking the same attack as before, because I want to make the opponent do the same thing, so answer back with the false edge cut or the thrust, which works. Marco lands the same riposte, I parry that riposte, but I also manage to parry the second attack. The second attack is verso fendente, which is natural from that kind of position. I parry the fendente and then I strike a sottano to the exposed arms of the opponent. So I strike below his arms and I try to move sideways toward my left. I managed to flee the greatest majority of the possible strike of the opponent, which tries to reach me, but he manages to touch me with the tip of the sword on my back. We never know what it will be in, let's say, a real fight with sharp swords, etc. Now, this action, let's say, can be considered a little duel if you watch it. There are all the parts of a fight per se. Let's say there is scouting, we try to scout each other. There are hand snipes, we try to snipe a little each other. And then I try to land an action which is kind of committed, but not really. So I try to beat aside the opponent weapon of Marco to land a thrust toward his head. I don't commit it too much because I wasn't really into the idea that it would have landed. Then I retreat backward, and now I know that I prepared my opponent for an action. I do the same thing after a few seconds, and then I follow instantly with Arrow verso fendente. It works and I manage to land the hit. It will probably be a kind of realistic fight, let's say. There is not too much intention, we don't want to actually hurt each other, but the pattern, it's interesting. It resembles a fight, let's say. A duel, more than a fight. Now, another little duel, let's say. Here you can see all the phases of the fight again. We try to study each other, we try to make the opponent get out of guard, to take control on the opponent, actually on the actions of the opponent. You then see a number of actions which we already did actually during the fight, during the various exchanges. We try to hit each other, then I manage to trick my opponent. So I am in longer, what actually lands the attack is I am in longer, I move forward and my opponent tries to deflect my longer. I avoid the beat of my opponent on my sword and then I strike a fendente on the same line basically toward the opponent's head. Now here Marco lands basically a perfect feint and thrust. So he feint a thrust actually and then lands a thrust on the same line because I was transitioning between one post and the other. He sees that I'm going toward finestra sinistra, so finestra on my left, and he then feints a thrust. I try to parry it by moving down with my sword, and he then keeps going, lands the real thrust, which manages to land in a very, very precise timing. Very good action. Now here Marco tries to move again between guards, etc. to get me out of guard, so to catch me out of guard. But I try to stay away, I keep my distance, and then I try to approach my opponent. I try to land a couple action, but it doesn't work. He manages to void or parry. And then on one of my advances, he manages to land a strike toward my arm. I was already going for a cut toward the throat, actually I already thought it, and so I deliver it, so it is unluckily a double, well, an afterblow, but to me everything is a double in this case. So I double it. And in this last action I try to fly too much close to the sun because I try to provoke my opponent, but I do it in a way which is too lazy actually. I remain too much into distance even while retreating, and what happens is that on one of my provocations my opponent lands the attack. Actually the timing is very good because it is when I'm going for it, not after it, and that's why also it lands. He lands a thrust, the usual thrust that sometimes Marco uses with me, raises the arms, closes that line and manages to hit me with the thrust, then rotates for a cut, but he already got me with the thrust from the very beginning. Very good people, I hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to subscribe to my channel because a lot of people watching my channel aren't subscribing, luckily more than 50%. And remember that if you want to support me, you can do it by joining my Patreon. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching as always, and see you next time.